So we are live. Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you all can hear me well. I'm Teddy McDaniel, the president and CEO of the Urban League of Central Carolinas, right here in Charlotte, North Carolina. And excited this afternoon to have all of you all here from some great voices. But this is the inaugural Urban Talks virtual session for the Urban League of Central Carolinas. And we're just really delighted to have an audience to talk about issues that are central to urban community in and around Charlotte, North Carolina, and around the country. And so just want to welcome everyone officially to the session. We're gonna get into some things today, and the title of our session is The Future of Work and Creating Wealth in Minority Communities. And it's important work that we deal with every day at the Urban League. But think about where we are. Today, Black America is really being challenged by three pandemics: COVID-19, the economic downturn, and then, of course, racist attitudes, actions, and policies that we're constantly fighting. And so now's the time to examine where we are and talk about some solutions to get us moving forward. We talk often about the racial wealth gap. And I mean, if you don't know the statistics, they are really tough for Black America, and unfortunately getting worse. And so I want to applaud all that are here, and then also introduce you. You'll hear from some dynamic panel members. To start, I'm just delighted today to hear from the National Urban League's leader, longtime civil rights leader. He's done amazing things. He was a two-time mayor of New Orleans, Louisiana, his beloved hometown, lawyer, entrepreneur, recent author. So if you haven't gotten his book, The Gumbo Coalition, please get it. It's a great read on leadership lessons. But he's just a tireless leader for the underserved. He's a friend and a colleague. But we're delighted to have Mark Morial, the president and CEO of the National Urban League.
Hey, so Teddy, Mark, thank you.
Talk to us. Thank you.
Let me tell you, first of all, good afternoon to all, and thank you, Teddy. Thank you, Spencer. I know Natalie will be joining. Dee Wilson will be joining. I want to thank all of them for joining. But, Teddy, I want to thank you for your leadership in Charlotte and in the Central Carolinas as you continue your distinguished career as an Urban League executive. Teddy is one of our new gen executives who's helping to transform the Urban League, people who've been successful in business and politics and government and other places who've come to bring their leadership stars and their leadership assets to the work of the Urban League movement. So, Teddy, I want to thank you for your leadership and also congratulate you on commencing this brand new Urban Talks virtual series. And Spencer, good to connect with you this morning or this afternoon. Let me set the conversation up this way. Just this week, yet again, the pandemic of unjustifiable racial violence under color of law has struck this nation and struck Black America. When Jacob Blake was shot in the back in Kenosha, Wisconsin, this young man appears to have survived that heinous, violent, unjustified attack by a man wearing a police uniform with a badge and a gun. But henceforth from this day, he will be paralyzed. A father of three, a goodwill ambassador who was at the scene trying to break up de-escalate another dispute, and he finds himself paralyzed because of unjustified police violence. Once again, the power of the iPhone, the power of the citizen, observer, bystander, spectator, witness, accountability agent helps us see what happened without any interpretation, spin, story, twist, or lie by the Kenosha Police Department. So we need not wait. We can make a judgment as reasonable, intelligent people that what happened to Jacob Blake was not justifiable. To add insult to injury, to take a very challenging matter and make it even worse, a 17-year-old white militiaman who on his Facebook page praises law enforcement, guns, and Donald Trump, goes to the scene with a long rifle for which he had no permit and no legal right to carry, and shoots two protesters. And it appears that the Kenosha Police Department welcomed the militia people, coddled the militia people, and allowed this person to flee the scene and go all the way to Illinois, even as witnesses at the scene said he's the one who did it. Look at the juxtaposition here. He shoots two people and kills them, and he's allowed to leave the scene. Jacob Blake, who's there as a goodwill ambassador, is going to his car. He's shot in the back. The juxtaposition points out the disparate treatment that Black people face when it comes to the police all too often in America. NBA players with the Milwaukee Bucks stood up and said, "We will not play tonight." NBA players with the Clippers and the Lakers said, "We are considering boycotting the remainder of the season." And we have to, and we love our basketball. Yeah. We have to applaud their courage and their willingness to take a stand. And as athletes, they're in the tradition of Colin Kaepernick and Muhammad Ali and Jesse Owens, John Smith, Tommy Carlos, Billie Jean King, to name just a few athletes over the years. Curt Flood,
sure,
who stood up for the rights of people and for civil rights and sacrifice. You know, the players, the big time players make a lot of money. A lot of those guys are making a living. But we have to support their gesture and trust their judgment to want to be part of this movement. So as this conversation is about the racial wealth gap and about the automation revolution and the future of work, we can't have a conversation about racial justice today without recognizing what's happened in Kenosha. And I might add, without recognizing that tomorrow I'm here in Washington, D.C., and we'll be joining the Commitment March. We'll be doing it with masks and social distancing, 57 years after the historic March on Washington. And we gather, when they gathered in 1963, there had been lynchings and killings throughout the South. And at that time, the recent assassination of Medgar Evers. Now, as we gather in 2020, we gather in the wake of the deaths of Jacob Blake, and George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and
Countless others.
Rayshard Brooks, and we can name so many tragic, unnecessary deaths. So I wanted to just say that and say the most important thing we can do as a gesture of humanity is to keep those family members in our thoughts and our prayers and recommit our work to a more just and equitable nation. Hard work, difficult work today. Now, let me quickly switch gears, Teddy, and just share with people, maybe to refresh their recollection about the nature of the racial economic gap in America. I want to talk about income, and I want to talk about wealth.
Okay.
So when it comes to income, the median family income for a Black family is in the $40,000 range. And some 25, 6, 7% of Black people live below, 1 out of 4, below the poverty line. Median income in the low 40s. For white families, the median income is in the low 70s. And maybe 9 to 10% of white Americans live below the poverty level. There is poverty in white America.
Mm-hmm.
And there are more white people in poverty in the aggregate than there are Black people in poverty in the aggregate. Many of these white impoverished Americans are hidden in rural areas.
Sure.
And they're not discussed as though poverty is only a Black problem or only a problem of Latinos or only a problem of indigenous communities. That's income. Wealth is an even wider disparity. The average Black family has 1/10 of the wealth of the average white family.
Right.
And what is this wealth? Most wealth in America, is tied to ownership of land and property. So Black Americans disproportionately, their wealth is in the equity in the home that they own, modest savings, maybe a modest retirement account for some, no retirement account for many. And that gulf is wide, and that gulf has widened. At the base of it is this big gap when it comes to home ownership. 42% of Black Americans own the home that they live in. 71 or 2% of white Americans own the home that they live in. So we talk about income, we talk about wealth. Now let's talk about business, because the other way in which wealth is built and accumulated in America is through ownership of enterprises, private enterprises, businesses of all sizes, big, medium, and small. There's a large number of African Americans in this nation, 2.5 million, most figures suggest, who've made a decision along the way to become a business owner or an entrepreneur or to become self-employed. At 2.5 million, however, of that 2.5 million, 90% are one-person businesses. It's a barber. It's a salon owner. It's a one-person consulting firm. It's any number of things that people do. So there's strong energy around entrepreneurship in our community. But the scale is small. And then another 250,000 businesses, roughly, who have more than one employee, and most numbers say that the average is between 5 and 9. We've got 1 or 2 multi-billion-dollar enterprises, if you look at the Black Enterprise Top 100 list. But most African-American businesses, even the largest, certainly wouldn't reach the levels of the Fortune 500. Most wouldn't reach the level of the Fortune 1000.
Right.
But we have businesses and we have energy. And then continuing, I want to add this because it's important. Black America has a large, significant cadre of intellectual and human capital. College educated, skilled craftsmen and craftswomen, tremendous amount of skill and talent across the board in science, in education, in law, in medicine, in research, and teaching and administering. Tremendous talent. We have tremendous talent, and more educated African Americans today than at any time in modern American history or in American history. So when we think about the racial wealth gap, I'd like to invite us to think about it from an asset point of view.
There you go.
And think about it in terms of liabilities also. But we have to begin by understanding the assets we have. So on a broader basis in this economy, an asset we have is our spending power collectively. 1.3 or so trillion collectively. That means we have a spending power almost equivalent to the size of the GDP of the Russian Federation, according to figures from a year or two ago. We have assets. We have spending power. We have human talent. And we have more African American elected officials than ever before, and more allied elected officials than ever before. We start with assets that we have to think about how to plan and lever them into cracking this pandemic of the racial wealth gap, which is locked in stone, locked in ice, locked in granite,
right,
in America. So putting all of this in place leads, as you know, Teddy, at the Urban League, we're about diagnoses and prescriptions.
There you go.
Our conversation can never be diagnostic without being prescriptive. And we have to think of the ideas to solve these problems on multiple ends. So I'll use a few historic analogies. When did our numbers change most dramatically? From about 1963 to around 1980. Our numbers changed significantly. The poverty rate declined significantly. The home ownership rate had a significant or a substantial increase.
That's right after these.
Why?
These great. Yeah, talk about that, Mark.
Public policy.
Policy, sure.
And a movement. A movement which created the Civil Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, the Great Society programs, and the attendant efforts in the private sector to respond to the Civil Rights Act. Affirmative action, fair employment practices. And we had this, you almost look at it, a mini Goldilocks period. And then the Reagan era came, and there was a pushback and an assault. Programs were cut, dollars were cut, arguments were made to discredit affirmative action. So we have to connect the dot that in this moment, public policy dating back to slavery and segregation and redlining helped to create the racial wealth gap. Therefore, that same public policy has to be a lever to fix it, to leverage other communities. And you're right, we're talking about targeted policies. We're talking about focused policies. So I wanted to put that out there on the table to sort of set the discussion up around where we are and what we do. And also the Urban League movement, we're in a trench on this. We're a laboratory for solution-oriented programs, whether it's our after-school work, our workforce development, our home buyer financial literacy and housing counseling work, our entrepreneurship work. We're a laboratory for change. And then we're an advocate for change. And so we're an advocate and a laboratory. And people who say, well, you've got all these programs, why do you still have poverty? I say scale.
There you go.
Scale. I said, if we have a solid reentry program in any city, and they're effectively serving 20 people or 30 people or 40 people, maybe even 50 people a year, there's another 300 to 400 or 500 or 600 or 1,000 not being served. So when we talk about solutions, we also have to talk about scalability of solutions. So I certainly would recommend that those of you who want to learn more about these numbers and these stats, check out the State of Black America report online and take a look at an abundance of data. If you're a researcher, if you're a student, if you're a journalist, if you're an interested citizen, and you want to become better, more knowledgeable than you already are, check out our research that's available for free at nul.org.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I think you make some really compelling points, and I'm glad that you brought up the term scale, because we're gonna get into that with the panel. We talk a lot about access to capital, and as you mentioned, there's no shortage of Black and minority-owned businesses, but the question is getting them to scale.
Mm-hmm.
And so I know, Mark, you really graced us with a lot of data and a lot of insight on to how policy will affect how we move forward. And I know Natalie is around. Don't see her yet. I think she's joining shortly. But I want to move into some of these panel questions. I know, Mark, you are short on time. We're so
yeah, I got about another minute. I have to chair a staff meeting in a few minutes.
Okay. The last thing, Mark, I'll ask you then, and this is something we talk about often because we are a do tank. We say that a lot. Urban League is not
we're a do tank.
We're a do tank. It is about what you do. But talk about the role with the National Urban League and UNCF and how we assist and train. How we allocate resources to really get our folks to scale and to full potential.
Well, in the workforce area, we have to lever relationships with colleges and universities and businesses and government to try to expand what we're able to do to help people gain marketable skills and then place them in a real job.
Right.
And of recent, we've been heavily focused on apprenticeships, which really is on-the-job training. That's a better term. People say apprenticeship. What do you mean? It's on-the-job training, so people can learn and earn at the same time, and that learning and earning will get them into a better earning position. So I like the concept of on-the-job training. for people. And it's work that we are working to do more of. And it is how we want to prepare people for the economy of the future. The economy of the future, some jobs will disappear,
right?
But new jobs will be created. Those new jobs, more often than not, are going to require technology skills. Significant, maybe in some places, but really marketable skills. And so everyone's got to be conversant in and know how to use technology at some level. You don't have to always know how all the wires connect.
Right.
You know, you may not know how to fix any of your devices, but you got to know how to use them. And I think that we have to continue to push on this digital divide issue, because the digitization and broadband access and having computers and phones and knowing how to use them is now a necessity of life.
That's right.
It's like the lights and the water. You got to have it.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
yeah.
you are just, you're locked out and left out. But
And
hey,
now-
I got to
now
hop.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mark.
Thanks,
We greatly
Spencer. Thanks,
appreciate it.
Teddy. And I'll miss Natalie, but give her my
Yeah.
best.
We'll do.
And
We'll do.
thank you for your leadership.
Thank
All
you,
right.
Mark.
Thank you.
So really appreciate Mark spending some time with us. And now we're going to get into some questions. Expect Natalie Cofield shortly. Let me introduce Spencer Disher, who is here with us. And let me say, unfortunately, D'Arva Wilson, who's a fantastic founder of D. Wilson Agency, had a conflict and can't make it, but we will certainly get her on in the very near future. But Spencer Disher is an adjunct professor in the School of Business and Entrepreneurship at Johnson & Wales University. He's also an executive board member at the Charlotte Angel Fund. Spencer has had quite a career in finance and really helping startups and entrepreneurship efforts to grow. I know you've been very involved, Spencer, also with Queen City FinTech and City Startup Labs. So,
correct.
Spencer, welcome. And let me get into one of those questions. And you heard Mark talk about scale. Now this will be access to capital, right? And so we always have to talk about that, because these businesses who have one employee need capital to gain more and get contracts. So what do you see the role of banks and financial institutions, and even groups like the Angel Fund, in lessening the wealth gap in minority communities?
Yeah, so I'm going to parse that into two parts, in terms of what we're talking about. There's what the financial institutions, including, things like angel funds and banks and so forth, what their role is. And so
Sure.
let's just dig right into it. And that would be that I would be saying that one of the two important things to keep in mind as it relates to this, and that's that their role, they should morally be doing the right thing. And just as importantly, they should be doing what's right financially. And so their role, the role that these entities need to play, is very important. And so I'm going to touch on a little bit of why those roles are important, and then what do we do in terms of addressing that. So financially, good examples are a bank, let's say, lends money to an ABC company, and it also, which is white owned, and it also lends money to an XYZ company, which is black owned. And what we know, and this is something that Mark was touching on, is we know that historically, and we can still demonstrate it today, that the ABC entity, startup company, will most likely get a better terms on their loan than XYZ,
Right.
if XYZ is even able to get it, okay? But let's say XYZ gets the loan, it's at a higher interest rate. Everything else, all things equal, in terms of the economy, in terms of where they're operating and so forth, XYZ, the economy goes into some type of recession or depression. Well, the company that's paying less interest has a higher chance of surviving than the company who's paying the higher interest rate. Well, then guess what happens to XYZ, black-owned XYZ, or minority-owned XYZ? They go belly up. The bank says, well, see, those guys, you're high risk, right? So it's self-fulfilling, so to speak. So that's the kind of example, and I think we're going to talk a little bit about it even later on, of how there's the human factor. But when we even start talking on things like automation, or even the buzzword today, and a lot of these tech startups is AI, artificial intelligence. The inherent bias that's actually getting incorporated into these AI processes, especially in financial institutions. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but I wanted to just talk a little bit about why banks and financial institutions, including Charlotte Angel Fund, and I'll break down a little bit about Charlotte Angel Fund. So when we think about entities that start up, and this is like my entrepreneurship class 101, we talk about, well, where do people get money? So the first place that people go to get money is they go to themselves, whether it be their account where they might have some money. It might be taking out a mortgage on their house. I've seen people, start businesses off their credit cards. Okay, right. I'm not necessarily recommending that. I'm just saying there are a lot of different ways that an individual is going to put money into their business. And the next source, heavy source of funding, and actually next to personal savings, the next highest source of funds is friends and family. Something like $60 billion is raised for individuals that are starting a business, whether it's a one-person business or a large business, is started through funding that comes from friends and family. And then we go, so between friends and family and the next level, which we would say may be venture capital, depending on the growth capability, is something called angel investing. And so whenever somebody asks me, well, who are angel investors? I immediately point them to Shark Tank, because Shark Tank is in effect a version of angel investing. And so, why, I wanted to just give you a little bit of breakdown of sources of money. So after that, venture capital is probably around $22 billion is raised. And if I said million before, I meant billion. Everything I'm talking about is billion.
Sure.
Angel investing, $20 billion is raised that way. And then banks, in terms of lending, actually are more like 14 billion. So they're actually toward the smaller aspect of funding for startups and business owners. So we've talked a little bit about why it's important. I gave you the example of why a bank, it's in an interest of the bank to provide the same type of credit and terms to us as they would anyone, such that ultimately that loan survives. And we want it to work, because ultimately they want their stockholders happy. So as a stockholder, I want to make sure that not only are they making the right terms for everyone, but I want to make sure that they take advantage of lending and providing money to minorities. And so Charlotte Angel Fund is a good example. And Charlotte Angel Fund is actually lent to minority-owned founders. Our first investment, Charlotte Angel Fund, and we usually invest in the form of equity and convertible notes. That's
Okay.
how we typically invest. And the size of those investments could range from 25,000 to $500,000. So that's kind of the range in which you'll see investments from angel investors, whether it be a group of angels like Charlotte Angel Fund. We're a group of investors that have pooled our money together to the tune of about $2 million, and we're making investments in companies. Our first investment as a fund was in a company called Upswing, which is minority owned.
Okay.
And so here's the thing that's important, Teddy, in terms of how we solve this. We have to be at the table, okay?
Right.
If we're not at the table, if like when I joined Charlotte Angel Fund, I look around the room and no minorities are in the room. There's no one to kind of counter what inherent, intentional or unintentional biases there might be in the group.
Sure.
Operates as
normal. Let's just keep
right.
on going.
So I see it there, among angel funds. When I go to these meetings, where are we? We got to be at the table. I also still I still dabble a little bit in the sense that I keep my contacts and network in place in the fixed income area.
Okay.
And I went to a major fixed income conference here in Charlotte that was put on by a major law firm, 400 plus attendees, and you could count on two hands how many of us were there. And so my point that I'm making is part of the solution is we got to be at the table.
Right.
We have to be at the table, whether it be things like Charlotte Angel Fund, where you have we need minority investors, or whether it be not-for-profits, which are making and helping make policy decisions. I happen to sit on the board of Habitat for Humanity, and we're talking about things that are going to impact housing in North Carolina.
Sure.
There's a House bill right now, House Bill 1200, that's sitting on the table that's going to have a large impact on homeowners here in North Carolina through the end of the year. So long-winded answer to
no,
but I wanted to just start to dig into what I think are some of the why is it important that financial institutions pay attention to us, and then how do we make sure that they do it? So
yeah, no, thank you. It's a good lesson on these options that a lot of entrepreneurs of color just don't know exist or have been locked out of, which is good. I want to. You mentioned nonprofits, and from a policy standpoint, I understand that. But let's go back into CDFIs, okay? And I want to talk about this because I've worked all over the country in banking, and I got to the state of North Carolina and found that there were very few, and so it surprised me. But let's talk about the role, because a lot of times when it comes to Black businesses and minority businesses, they go to places that they're familiar with, right? Or Black-owned banks, and they're not a lot. But talk about the role of CDFIs and how we need to expand that, or maybe we don't, or the strategy to getting businesses the capital they need to grow.
Right. So I'm going to first of all put the disclaimer that that's not an expertise of mine, but I know enough to at least we can bounce around a few things on this. And so first of all, community development financial institutions, CDFIs, are located all across the nation. And basically they're out to, their legacy, if you will, is to act as stakeholders in actually addressing what we're talking about today, which is this racial wealth gap. Okay. And they do it through trying to provide financial resources within underserved areas, communities, both underserved financially and from the standpoint of access to credit. And so you're right. I think that I did a quick lookup of in North Carolina. I think there are only 19 here, and of those 19, I think 4 are affiliated. 4 of the 19 are linked to each other.
Right.
That would be self-help. But I would say that they definitely, and keep in mind that this came through policy. These CDFIs came through, their roots are in policy. And so this goes to the plug of, and I'm sorry I have to plug it right now, but we're going to plug how important voting is.
Sure.
Because in the food chain, you have, who we're putting in various offices that make public policy, which is impacting both, the for-profit, not-for-profit sector, and things like CDFIs are a result of what I would say good policy to try to have an impact on this impact within these financially distressed communities. So I think that's important. And by the way, I want to just go back to and just make a plug. You mentioned scale
Right.
as we were coming into this, and this is just something I want to make note of. And so I applaud these individuals who start up companies and want to try to address a problem. We say in the startup entrepreneur community, all the startups are basically trying to address a problem, and that's where the seeds of an idea for a startup come from. But many times we get caught up on little things like title. I need to be the CEO of my company. I need to be the president. I want to put that on my business card. I need to be the CEO, or I need to be the president. So we're all busy trying to be CEOs and presidents. So we're busy chasing the title instead of trying to chase truly the financial opportunity.
Right.
And that is that, maybe Teddy can start up a business in consulting, and Spencer Disher can start up a business in consulting. And so we're both sitting out there fighting to get in consulting. But the argument would be that if Teddy and Spencer and Natalie get together and start a consulting business, we're starting to scale. And we can leverage each other's ideas and knowledge and so forth. And so I would just make a small footnote or plug for, as we talk about, there are a lot of dimensions to the concept of scale, but one of them is let's not get too caught up with titles. Let's get caught up with how I can team up with other people to pursue opportunities.
Yep. Yeah. Thank you. That's great. Yeah, we could talk all day about scale, but I'm glad you brought it. I want to emphasize it. So next, I'm happy to have Natalie Cofield, an old friend. Welcome, Natalie. Glad to have you. And to the audience, for those that don't know, Natalie she's a serial entrepreneur. I need to say that. She is the founder and CEO of Walker's Legacy. And if you haven't heard, this is in tribute to Madam C.J. Walker, of course. And Natalie has been at the forefront of entrepreneurship for women around the country for many years. And so I also need to say that she's done a lot of things. She's been on the cover of Black Enterprise magazine. She's a superstar. But she's also a proud graduate of Howard University. I can't not say that because a certain female graduate of that university is a vice president candidate. So I have to make that plug for HBCUs and for Howard specifically. But Natalie, thanks for being here. I'm gonna get right into it with you because we've been talking about this entrepreneurship and automation world for a while.
Yes.
But the first question for you is what does success look like when it comes to creating generational wealth in Black and brown communities? And tell us about that role that you know so well, entrepreneurship, and how it plays out.
Yeah. So, I mean, what does success look like as it relates to generational wealth transfer in Black and Brown communities? I'll start there. That varies, but it should look like this. The formula and the tools should be the same. How much you have to give is what varies, right? So we should be financially sound from the perspective of having bank accounts, from the perspective of having savings, from the perspective of having multiple savings accounts. There are savings accounts that you dip into just because you would like to go on a trip. And then there are disaster type of savings accounts that you dip into when something catastrophic has happened, i.e., we're in a circumstance like we're in right now during a pandemic. These are things that we can always be prepared for. The ebbs and flows of life, right?
Right.
Part of that also requires that we are reducing some of the expenses. People ask about how do you build savings? You build savings by either creating more money that you save or by reducing expenses and saving what is left over from that. And all of those things are definitely things that we need to continue to evaluate as it relates to their possibilities. You also build wealth through things like insurance. Having the proper insurances on both yourself, your life, your health, your assets, your home, your loved ones. And in some instances, these insurances, I think for some folks, it sounds very expensive to think that you might have $1 million life insurance package. But when you look at what that may cost you on a monthly basis, it feels more palpable because that's what we've been spending on Starbucks possibly.
Right.
Or that's what you may spend on, whatever your favorite adult beverage may be every month. And so if we're able to put those aside, if we're able to put those aside and say we're going to use that for insurance, that's what we should be doing. The other thing that we need to do is have ownership. You can't insure things you don't own at the level that you'd like to, right? So ownership through home ownership, through business ownership, through asset ownership. Let me tell you, art is a form of an asset. And I don't think a lot of people even think about the fact that you can transfer wealth through transferring your art collections
Right.
to children. These are serious things that people are. So, we should be thinking about this in multiple ways. To me, that's how you transfer wealth. And then I look at that from the parental, the owner perspective, and then from the children's perspective, because I want to say this.
Okay.
It is very important for us to take care of the businesses that took care of us. There are a lot of kids that grew up working for companies that were blue collar businesses that their mom and dad created, that went off to every school known to man, came back, had a lot of pride about themselves, and decided that they didn't want to work there anymore. It was good enough to pay the house note. It was good enough to pay the college expenses, but it's not good enough for you to work there anymore. And so what we see is that now people don't want to go back to work at these companies, and then they fall by the wayside, and mom and dad sells the business, or aunt or uncle sells the business. That's not how you get to generational wealth either. What we've done is we've lost a generation in that. You're not transferring that business and all of its past performances, all of its past clients and present clients off to anybody. So we have to ask ourselves and our young people to teach them to grow up in these businesses, not to look at them as things that are beneath them because of the industries that we're in. And we're at a great time for this right now. There's somebody who gave up on a cleaning business because it was not what they learned at Harvard. Harvard told you to go off and work at McKinsey Consulting. They didn't tell you to go off and work and take your mom's janitorial business and turn it into a multi-million-dollar business. Well, guess who's doing well right now during COVID? That janitorial business.
That's right.
Those necessity-based businesses that are recession-proof are the ones that are doing well. So I think it's important for the owners and the children to value the very institutions for which their livelihoods have stood on foundations of. That's how you also build generational wealth. In some regards, it's not even an option that you're not going to do this, because this is part of the family tradition, and therefore you need to pay your dues and be here and add value to what this family has done. And you asked me another question about where things are going from the workplace, Teddy. Is that what you asked me?
Well, so I want to start to talk about automation, right?
Okay.
So at the Urban League in Charlotte, I mean, we're deep in workforce development, right? From training, from technicians to coding, medical coding to IT type things. But automation, Okay, so as it continues to progress, which industries do you see will be impacted, or talk more about the skills and the functions that our people will need to be prepared for those jobs that we don't know exist yet. Mark talked about that in automation.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, automation should have all of us shaking in our boots. Right. I mean, at some point, it's almost like, automation has the capacity to do so much of what so many of us do, so many different facets. I mean, automation is something that we're seeing in the trucking industry, self-driving cars. It's something that we're seeing in the service industry with you touching the screen and telling the screen what you want. We're seeing it in the retail industry. You literally walk out of the store with everything that was in your bag and never have to talk to, touch, or engage with a single person there. That's what Amazon is creating.
Think about that. Wow.
With their space, because it reads every single barcode in your bag, right? So it starts in some regards, it starts with the justification of this is trying to help us improve operational efficiency, reduce costs and expenses. And so we're starting with, the service, retail work in that space, things that cost us more money. And then it will start to bubble its way up to other things. Algorithmic decision metrics that now start touching into management, right? Because management is supposed to be wise and logical and informed and making the best decisions on behalf of the company. Well, what does that look like when you have an algorithm and a machine that can generate your financial projections? Do you still need to have the size of your financial services and CPA and all that stuff that you used to have before? I don't know. But these are questions that we should be asking ourselves, because once we get into this game, which we've already gotten into.
Yeah, we're here.
Okay. Everybody is up for discussion. Every single thing everybody does is up for discussion. We are working in a virtual space. So much of what we are doing, I'm not with you physically, Teddy or Spencer, but we're together right now.
Right.
This is probably the biggest technological revolution that has happened at the same time, simultaneously around the world. Everybody has been forced to go online.
Right.
Doing that, it's now all through your computer, and it's all through output and production. And I think that there are some lessons, some studies, and some research that will come out of this. We already know we're going to see a shift in where people work. We already know that this idea of going back to business as usual is something that's kind of like, well, I don't know. It's like a relationship. Yeah, that was over. Okay.
Right.
I don't know if I can go back to that, and so it's a nostalgic moment, but we can't guarantee that we're going back. We've already been exposed to the life that we're living right now.
Yeah.
So we have already seen, research has shown that no one can guarantee that they're saying one out of 11 jobs, or maybe 4 out of the 11 jobs are jobs that are actually coming back from unemployment.
Right.
And those jobs that do come back, how many of them are going to be remote, and how many of them are going to be different because technology has shown us what we can and can't do during this moment?
Yeah, it's just great response. And there's so many companies who have found that, hey, I produce more and make more money without all these expenses, without these people.
That's right.
That's right. We're all in adjustment mode.
I want to just
Spencer, I want to bring you back in.
Just one comment on generational wealth transfer. I just want to comment and insert that people should also make sure to take into account estate planning. Okay, how many of us actually have some type of will or some type of trust that have been set up to allow for transfer of wealth? So it's just a small insert that if you haven't spent any time thinking about your estate or estate planning, just it's a footnote, something to look into.
Sure.
Then, so talking about automation, and I want to even move us into there's a lot of buzz in the startup world about artificial intelligence, and so we could spend another hour just talking about what that means. But let's just say that there's something called general AI. There's very specific AI that tries to perform one task, And then there's general AI, which is this idea that we can replicate how the human mind would function and actually have machine learning. So I'm kind of separating those two. So it's scary from the standpoint to think about, okay, AI. I mean, people are like, geez, I don't have a clue. I don't know what that's about. So I would encourage, in general, anybody that's listening right now, that you need to occasionally take a look at and read what's going on in AI, because it's having a huge impact on us. We were talking about it in terms of finance. So just like the behavioral aspects of, am I going to give this Black person a loan, or this person from a minority community a loan, versus someone from this other community or neighborhood a loan, that's actually getting picked up by AI. Because what fuels AI? Data. Yep. Data is the fuel for AI. So an AI engine without data is worthless. And an AI engine that's taking in bad data or bad fuel is also dangerous. Or one of the things that I would be saying to you, and I'm going to give you a good example of someone who, this young lady, she's a PhD out at working on a master's degree, at Stanford. She realized that there's bias going on in AI. She doesn't know hardly anything about AI specifically, except she started reading up on it. And now she's become an expert in terms of trying to help with recognizing bias in AI. So what we have to do is look at these situations where you would say, geez, I'm getting ready to lose my job because of AI, and think of, okay, how do I position myself to take advantage of the opportunity? So if my car is going to be self-driving, guess what? That car is basically turned into a very complex computer, and it's going to, and sooner or later, I got to take it in to get work on it. And so I need somebody that's trained with technology, or understanding the technology that's needed to try to keep that self-driving car, self-driving truck working. So how do we even know about that? How does someone know about that? Right now, as I think Natalie was touching on it, we're in this virtual world. And the beauty of this virtual world is that I can be in just about any meeting anywhere in the world without leaving my study, okay? And so guess what? So Alphabet, which typically would have their annual meeting in some remote location that you and I are not going to be able to get to, put their entire annual report, their entire annual meeting is virtual. It's recorded. Right. You can go and listen to some of the most progressive minds in the business industry and hear where they're going and what they're doing virtually without even leaving your room. And so that's happening. My Charlotte Angel Fund, we have our meetings virtually. There's a lot of virtual meetings that we can now attend that we couldn't attend just because perhaps we didn't have the financial resources to get there geographically, or maybe I wasn't invited per se. I can now get to those meetings, and the information that flows from some of those things, I think, can help one think about, how do I position myself such that if I'm maybe about to lose my job, where is the future of that job? So,
right. Yeah, it sounds like we need a bunch of statisticians. You know, it's all about the data. So Natalie, let's go back a little bit. I want you to talk about women and entrepreneurship. You know, it's really been your life's work the last decade, and pushing them forward, as they've always been the stalwarts of our families, and now really accelerating women in entrepreneurship.
Yep, absolutely. Very happy to do that. So I talk a lot about Black women specifically as it relates to entrepreneurship, looking at our trends in our community. So first off, we have to start with nearly 80% of Black households are led by a primary breadwinning Black woman. That's 80%.
Wow.
That's huge. Okay, so we can go into all types of reasons on why that's the case. Everything from lower than half of us, half a percentage of Black women being married and having access to dual income households, to continued racial injustice that affects Black women and men. But that's where we are, 80%. So to make the economic circumstances of a Black woman better is inherently to make the Black community better off economically.
Mm-hmm.
Hands down, period. And this is not a woman against man circumstance. It's just that this is what the data is saying.
Sure.
Data shows. Furthermore, when we look at Black businesses, what we see is that Black women are, again, the only community of women that over-index against their male counterparts. So nearly 60%, 58.9% to be exact, of all Black businesses started within the last 10 years have been started and run by Black women. That's almost 60%.
Wow.
That's huge. Yep. So it's at this point impossible to have a conversation about Black business and not start with the Black woman at the forefront of that. This is not about, as I said yesterday, putting red on something or throwing some tea at the event and thinking you are talking to women entrepreneurs. That's not what this is about. This is about they need the same resources, the same supports, the same deep dive into educational, technical assistance, the same access to capital that anyone else who was a business owner, regardless of what their gender was, would need. And so the other thing that we see is that when we look at Black women business owners, we still see a huge gap that exists for them between Black men as it relates to gross receipts. So Black women entrepreneurs are on average grossing roughly $30,000. It's probably about $28,000, $26,000 annually in gross receipts, while Black men are grossing nearly $100,000 in gross receipts. All that juxtaposed against white men who are grossing nearly $726,000.
Wow.
That's a big gap.
That's right. We need to highlight it. That's
right.
It's
a huge gap. So there's a gap that exists between Black men and Black women, and then there's a gap that exists between white men and everyone else, right? And so our goal is to continue to keep trying to close that gap. How are we going to do that? We need to continue to keep engaging women. Why? Because we're 60% of the businesses that have been started in the Black community right now. Yeah. So it's not about like, oh, this is a cute thing, a sorority thing. This is a Black business survival thing, it's and it must incorporate the woman in a meaningful and significant way. Furthermore, what we've also seen is that Black women, we did a research study for the Small Business Administration on Black female entrepreneurship, past and present, that sits in the Library of Congress. Black women, since the day that we were able to have our labor counted as labor, have been involved in the U.S. labor market at higher rates than any other community of women. Why is that the case? Again, since the day we were allowed to work, we had to work.
That's right. We had no choice.
So there was no choice. There were no laws or inherent customs and traditions that said the woman must be home not working. That wasn't how we came.
If you Black.
That wasn't how we came. This was you knew, okay, we both rising with the sun and coming home when it dawns. So, that's how our households had been. So there was not that kind of discrepancy that existed. And therefore, that's why we had such high labor participation rates, because we had to. Furthermore, when we look at today, what we still see is the same thing. Forbes released a report that showed that Black women were disproportionately more inclined to have what you would consider to be side hustles, which were otherwise known in our mama and our grandmama's time as their second and third job. Side hustles, not side hustles, because that's cute to say. It was the second and third job. Well, why are we doing that? We're doing that because Black women still have a wage parity gap that far exceeds white women and certainly far exceeds white men. So again, we're talking about Women's Equal Pay Day, and we did that back in April, and we just did Black Women's Equal Pay Day last week.
Right.
And we're in August, almost coming into September. That's not equal. We can't just talk about this with this ubiquitous language of women. because there's an intersectional component to this where the rules don't apply and
That's right.
circumstances aren't the same. And so again, Black women are trying to close that 64 cent to their $1 gap. It will take, as they've shown us, it will take 100 years for a Black woman to achieve wage parity to a white man. With the way that we have gone. And it will take the average Black household 250 plus years
Right.
to the average wealth of an average white family. Now, I don't know about you, Teddy, or you, Spencer, but I know for me, I don't play average at anything. So I add some extra years onto that.
That's right.
The average ain't where I'm trying to land.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
Place, okay, so that's that on that. But then even with that, when we look at this, and I'll close with this, we talked about the average net worth of a Black woman, and we looked at that for the average net worth of a white woman, and it was $41,000, the average net worth for a single white woman. Now, the net worth, as my finance folks know, take all your assets,
right,
take all your expenses, and that's what you're really worth. So if on this side you got way more expenses than you do assets, you got a negative net worth.
That's right.
You have as many expenses as you do assets, you got a zero net worth. Hopefully we get you to the positive net worth space.
Sure.
But we have $41,000 sitting on the balance sheet for the net worth for white women. Then for Black women, what we have is $100.
Wow.
Yep.
And that takes us back, Teddy, to the first question you asked me when I got on the dais, was this: how do we build generational institutional wealth in Black families? And I started talking about all these insurances, just in case some stuff, as Chris Rock would say, taking over businesses and having access to homes. How are you $41,000 because maybe your parents gave you a home?
That's right.
In whatever state, beat up or beat down, right? Worked up or beat down. It doesn't matter. There's value on that land. You can knock the whole home down, and the value of the land is worth more than the home sitting on top of it. That's going to add to your asset side, okay? Or, unfortunately, someone passed, but they had a life insurance policy and they bequeathed to you some of their assets. That's how you get to more positivity on the asset side. That's how we increase the net worth.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
That's how we do that.
Excellent. Yeah, it's something we got to accelerate, but always educate, because as you mentioned, we have assets.
That's
have had them in the community for decades and generations, but unfortunately, for whatever reasons, and there are myriad reasons, we've given them away, or we sold, or we just didn't keep them.
That's right.
So you have to. Spencer, I want to go back. Well, let's stay with the wealth building conversation. We're in Charlotte, second largest banking industry in the country. All these corporations, like all these cities. What should organizations and corporations be doing to support minority-owned businesses? I mean, because of racial unrest and all of that, there are people saying, and corporations making commitments, right? And then people criticize that. But in your opinion, what should corporations and organizations be doing to support these businesses so they can scale?
So I go back to if they don't have someone that looks like us at the table, then they're not going to have a clue how to even find us. I hear and see, in various, whether it be educational or for-profit organizations, not-for-profit organizations, there are so many of them that have some statement about increasing diversity.
Right.
And they're talking about increasing diversity without having any of us at the table to even know where to find it. Charlotte Angel Fund, they would like to have more minorities involved, but they were at a loss as to, well, we don't even know how to go about finding where they are. Now, I don't want to get into how large an effort they made.
Right.
The point is that I think that the first thing that any of these organizations that that we expect to have an impact or bring more of us in, to lend more money to us from a credit standpoint, to invest more money into it from an equity or venture capital or angel investment standpoint, I think we have to make sure that there are more of us that are at the table. And so not for profit, same thing. We have to make sure that we're there. And so at the flip side of that is we need to go there, okay? We can't be comfortable. You know that Johnson & Wales has this great relationship with the Urban League, and Benjamin Robinson happens to be head of the College of Business over there. And one of the things that we talk about all the time is that we as people of color, we need to be talking to each other and networking. And so when there's a position for board of directors for a not-for-profit that's as large as Habitat with a multi-million-dollar budget and impact and connections to major Fortune 500 companies, which, by the way, is one path into a corporate board, then we need to show up at that not-for-profit. You know, we need to be there for the Urban League in terms of what you're doing. So, you know, I can't just sit there with, I got mine, you know, everybody else needs to worry. We need to make sure that we're reaching back. Even young men, it just was announced that there's something called NC IDEA. NC IDEA is basically putting together a group of individuals here in North Carolina. They just put out a press release. I will be part of that. And along with that is a young man named Calvin Williams, who's a startup company called Freeman Capital. You've heard, you know,
I know Calvin, sure.
Out there, he's out there. He's on that board. So Calvin's not only trying to get his company going and on solid financial footing, but he's already reaching back to see what he can do to help others like him, you know, find, you know, who are these angel investors? Who are these venture capital? By the way, he just received some venture capital funding. So good. Those are some of the things that we have to make sure. We got to be at the table.
Yeah, it's you know, lift as you climb, certainly. You have to do that. Well, listen, we're starting to get towards the end here, and it's been a really thoughtful conversation around automation and wealth creation. We got to keep pushing. Both of you all know this is also about educating those that are around us, our network, and especially younger folks. So, and Spencer, I want you to just talk about minority serving institutions. Johnson & Wales is the one. We got Johnson C. Smith here, HBCUs, and all of these. What do we need to be teaching so that when these students, or even at the high school level, I should say that, we can't leave CMS or districts out, because we talk enough about you got to get your core skills, but we don't talk enough about business at the high school level. But what should we be training and teaching so that when you do come out, you had an asset building mindset?
That's a great question. And so I think that when I think about what they should be doing, here's a scary concept, and it just gives you an example of how, in the same way that I've talked about, we need to find out what a lot of these high technology, a lot of these growth companies are doing. It turns out that something like over half of all the HBCUs were still teaching Fortran 5 years ago. Okay, Fortran was taught, and God knows, hopefully you all can see, I got a few gray hairs here. Right. Fortran was taught in dinosaur age when I was coming along. Okay, if you're not familiar with things like Python, then we've got to make sure that our HBCUs, and I think they're doing. Don't get me wrong, Johnson C. Smith. I think they're doing an excellent job at reaching out and making a connection to Microsoft. Sure. That type of connection is the kind of connections that each of these HBCUs. These are the kind of connections that the Urban League. These are the kind of connections that I think we need to be making, so that we understand what's the need in the pipeline, so that we're not making the mistake of teaching Fortran. I mean, things like that. So my quick response is that we need to make sure that what's being asked of, that we are making sure is in those schools. And I think the HBCUs in general, the things that I've read recently and I'm hearing, says they're coming on board with that type of thinking.
Can I
Okay.
add something to this?
Sure, Natalie. I know you need to hop in.
Yeah, I do. So first off, I just want to say I do have to hop off after this, but Spencer, it's been a pleasure connecting with you. Teddy, as always, I am honored and grateful for the opportunity to share the
Thank
stage
you for being here.
and platform with you. One of the things that we talked a lot about with Walker's Legacy was about HBCU and making sure that entrepreneurship is perceived to be interdisciplinary. What does that mean? That means that the medical school should be teaching entrepreneurship. The law school should be teaching entrepreneurship. The School of Fine Arts should have classes on entrepreneurship. Why? Because entrepreneurship is just but an action verb, essentially. And what it is doing is a byproduct of what you are doing. So if you have a medical facility and you are a doctor by trade and you own a medical facility, you are in medical entrepreneurship. If you are a artist and you are, selling your services, you are a creative entrepreneur. So, people need to be able to see themselves in every facet of entrepreneurship, because entrepreneurship is facetless. It is infinite in terms of where it can go. It's all about what you are doing. So not just having that sit in a school of business, which again, a student from School of Fine Arts is never really going to go up there potentially. You don't want to keep that type of information from them so that they know about how to deal with their contracts and own the masters to their masters. These are the business conversations that they should be getting in School of Fine Arts, regardless of whether they have access to business or not. So that's one. And then two, at the early stages, we just did a big girl summit. We had hundreds of girls ages 7 to 22 talking about entrepreneurship. We had a 15-year-old multimillionaire on, Michaela Ulmer, her, Teddy.
Yep, sure do.
She just dropped her book recently. She's 13 years old. We just finished a class teaching more than 40 girls who are between the ages of 7 and 18 entrepreneurship through summer boot camps. Why? Because these girls have hobbies. They have passions. They have interests. And if someone can turn lemonade into a multi-million-dollar business, I'm just going to assume that anybody could turn, even if you're making bracelets, all the stuff we think is cute, people are making money off of.
Business. That's a business.
As parents and grandparents, we need to stop thinking about, oh, this is so cute that Johnny and Sally are doing this. And say, oh, Johnny and Sally, this is like you have a little business on your hands.
Mm-hmm.
And start talking to them and giving them the type of confidence that they need to actually see themselves going from a plastic cup to being in 1,600 stores across the country by the time that they're 15. That doesn't start by just kind of saying, this is your side deal. This is something you're doing when Nana comes in town. This starts by saying, you're on to something.
That's right.
We're going to be
Let's invest in you.
together. And
Very well put. I love it. I like it.
And absolutely. Parents have to be involved in that process too and know when to get in and get out of the way of their children.
That's right. That's right.
I will say that. That's my 2 cents on that. Gentlemen, it has been an honor to represent my Black female leadership on this panel here.
Yeah, thank you, Natalie. You represent well as
done it very well.
The last thing I'll say is, you heard about medical entrepreneurs, all that. Folks that know me know, if you're a tax exempt or nonprofit, you're a social entrepreneur.
That's right.
Be clear. So with that, thank both of you all. It's been an enriching discussion. We're so so grateful for you all to spend some time with us, and we just want to say to all, keep it up. Let's keep pushing. We got to make our voices heard, and we'll be back in touch for the next version of Urban Talks with the Urban League of Central Carolinas. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Thanks a lot. Everybody have a good day.